Okay, we'll have 5 minutes opening speech from each, from left to right, or right to left, I don't know, starting from Anas, and then we will open it for open discussion. Okay. So it is only 5 minutes speech, please. Then we leave it for the.
Bismillah.
Of course, you know the title of the panel is what's in the coming 10 years for the open source.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brahim. So, what I would like to reflect on in these 5 minutes, and hopefully, actually, just putting forward some ideas and questions that we will hopefully all try to answer. From my point of view, I would like to focus on the situation of free and open source software in the Arab region, and how we can really look into the next 10 years from a local perspective, how we can really benefit from what free and open source software has to offer us. So we talked yesterday briefly about some of the challenges that we are facing and how we can change these challenges and convert them into opportunities to move forward. And obviously there are a bunch of cool folks working on different aspects of these challenges in different parts of the region. My concern is that these efforts are largely fragmented. So you can see some really great work being done by KAXT here in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. There is in Jordan, in the past couple of months, they started what they call the Jordanian Open Source Society or Association. There's a project called Ma'bar in the Balamand University in Lebanon. And we also have a whole bunch of Linux users groups, Drupal users groups, mainly local, providing support and setting up awareness lectures, programs, some small training initiatives. But they still, well, the problem is that because these efforts are fragmented and scattered all around the region, work tend to be repeated again and again. So we really have leverage here that we can create by bringing these guys together and asking them to network more, to learn more from each other. And in the end, we are working in the free and open source software world. So we can reuse the software code that we write, the documentation that we build, particularly that we use the same language. So we don't need 5 or 6 translations of the Drupal user manual or the kernel, for example, implementations guide and things like that. That's one of the things that currently are happening, but still need to be connected and really pushed forward to create that synergy and getting more like what the word goes to say that the sum is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So I think that should be one of our main objectives over the next few years. And also, really, if we focus on 2 things. The first one is the size, the massive size of the potential market of everything that we do. And it's so good to hear about many commercial initiatives in free and open source software in the region, in Saudi Arabia, and I'm aware of a few others being built in Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. And the second one is really to focus on the openness, the concept of openness, and how we can reuse the resources, the available documentation, training programs, when we have events, how we can replicate the events and the successes of these events into different parts of the region. I think that would really help us moving forward for the next 10 years. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't have a single theme. I was just trying to predict the future, and of course, I think all of us will probably repeat this again and again, of course, but it's very difficult to predict the future. I see, for the most part, a continuing of the trends that I think you've already heard and many of you have already been observing. Let me make just a few points. I believe that there's going to be a continuing development and use of open source software increasingly in a vast number of different spaces for a lot of the varieties that you've already heard. I think there's going to be more consolidation of some existing open source software projects where they do the same thing. Why would we have these 3 projects? Maybe we don't need all of them. I think as far as the user is concerned, there's going to be transitions, but in general, I think in most places, the more successful ones start with the easy problems first and then move to the harder ones. So for example, I would expect that for a lot of governments and businesses, they'll start with the ones that are easier, the ones that are back ends where the interfaces to users are relatively fewer and so on, and then gradually transition to other things. Which actually implies also that I think one of the things that people can do now, even if you're not planning to transition certain things to an open source implementation, to make it possible to transition to any other implementation, ensuring that you have web interfaces and control over your data and the data formats. Frankly, it's a good idea whether or not, even if you weren't going to use open source at all, but simply to make sure that you have choices in the future for vendors and suppliers and so on. And indeed, that's generally one of the big challenges of using open source software in a business or government environment. It's not so much that the products can't do the job, it's that the costs of transition, if you divide it over long enough time, they'd be fine, but the transition all at once is often very difficult for some projects. I think there's going to be an increasing understanding of open source software and at government policy and business issues. I think you've already heard that in a number of cases. Indeed, I think you could argue that one of the biggest challenges of the next number of years is going to be education. And I don't mean education necessarily just the college level. I mean as in a sharing of knowledge at all levels. It's very difficult to make wise policy decisions when you don't understand something. And I don't mean that to be pejorative. It is difficult. And some of these things don't make sense to some folks, or at least they have to get a deeper understanding before they can make wise decisions. And I think that's in many ways just going to take time. Specifically in the open source area, some of you already know, open source has a short list of requirements on licenses. I will focus on the licensing issue just for a moment here. There are at least officially more than 100 licenses that declare themselves, that are recognized as being open source software licenses. The trouble with such a large number is that causes fragmentation. Now, so in some sense I'm predicting what's already happening, which makes my job easier here, but what's happening already, and I expect to continue to happen, is very much a consolidation over a very short list of licenses. Really, I think that's already in many ways happened. But basically, by having a relatively short list of licenses that are mutually compatible in certain ways, it makes it much easier to collaborate. And since in order for open source software to work, the whole reason for these licenses is to enable collaboration. Ensuring that licenses permit that very collaboration is an important point. I guess all this, the GPL, the LGPL, the MIT licenses, the BSD license. I would accept the Apache license, maybe 1 or 2 more, and after that, you probably shouldn't be using it. Simply because if you create, and unfortunately, we still have a few businesses and a few governments who like to create what I would call vanity licenses. It's a new license. Why? We didn't have a reason, but we wanted to put our name on something. That may be amusing to some. It helps the lawyers get paid, but it doesn't actually help accomplish any useful goal for a business or government. So I believe that's slowly going away, and if you can help, that would be wonderful. I'll talk about security briefly, so I probably should talk about security here. I believe we're going to continue to see people working on ensuring that open source software is secure and so on. But I would like to believe, and I actually do believe, that over the next number of years we're going to see efforts that look not just at looking for specific vulnerabilities and fixing them, although that's important.